Today I'm out in the forest with my beaver-toothed friend, the BMW 4 Series. Let me start out this video by saying that I don't find this grille to be a problem at all. I know it's somewhat controversial, but at least to my eye, these look an awful lot more like the BMWs from the 1970s and perhaps even the 1980s. Now, it is definitely big and it is definitely controversial, but that does not seem to be slowing BMW 4 Series sales. Since this is a convertible, we clearly need to talk about the rag top next. It is controllable via the key or a button in the center console. I can open or close the lid using this remote. I simply press and hold the button, and then the lid springs into action here. You can also do it while you're in motion, thanks to the rag top design, which is lighter than a typical hardtop convertible. But if I pause it here, we could talk about the construction of the rooftop, because this is not your typical 1980s or 1990s fabric roof. We have a canvas section right here, but it's pretty hard. And if you notice, as the roof is slowly creeping back here, there's actually a hard top section in here that you'll see when we get on the inside. This is a multi-layer soft top, but on the inside of the convertible, it feels an awful lot more like a hard top convertible. I'll attempt to put this back up so you can see it right here. It is several layers, including some hard, rigid plastic layers and a lot of foam sound insulation. So if you're the kind of person that's typically been debating between a soft top or a hard top because of the quiet factor or the insulative factor in a cold climate or a hot climate, you might want to take a look at the BMW 4 Series, because this top is quieter, cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter than your typical soft top. It may not be quite where we see some hard tops, but it definitely gives the look with a lot of the benefits from a hard top. I'm sure I don't have to remind you all to let me know what you think about the look of the 4 Series down there in the comment section. And with that out of the way, it's time for my next controversial statement, in which I tell you that I think that the best engine, or at least my favorite engine in the 4 Series, is the 2-liter 4-cylinder model, the 430i that I'm driving today. This is the rear-wheel drive convertible, produces 255 horsepower, but most importantly, this is lighter and more nimble feeling than the M440i, or of course the BMW M4. And that's important because depending on the version of the 4 Series you get, this is not exactly a lightweight vehicle. An M440i, for instance, can weigh at least 3,800 pounds. And at 188 inches long, this is not exactly a small BMW convertible anymore. If you want something that's a little bit closer to the older BMW 3 Series convertibles that you might be waxing poetic about from the 1990s, then you're going to want to take a look at the BMW 2 Series. The 4 Series has definitely become a little bit larger, a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more of a grand tourer. There's a staggered wheel and tire setup, 225 with tires up front, 255 with tires out back. We also get M brakes back here, but obviously if you get a real M4, you would have things taken to the next level. So even grippier tires, even wider tires, even more aggressive brakes. The design theme out back is best described as restrained and elegant. We have full LED tail lamp modules with red turn signals. That's not exactly my preference, but we do have dual exhaust tips at the back. And really, there's relatively little differentiation between the different versions of the 4 Series, unless you start talking about the absolutely crazy performance versions. When it comes to driver assistance tech, BMW continues to go about things a little bit differently. One feature that is not standard on the 4 Series, and that continues to blow my mind, to be perfectly honest, is adaptive cruise control. Even on the model that I'm driving, which is reasonably well equipped, it's definitely more expensive than the base 430i. We'll talk about that at the end of the video. This particular model does not have adaptive cruise control on it. Although admittedly, you don't have too many options when it comes to convertibles in the United States, because if you thought sedans sold poorly, you should check out the sales of two-door vehicles, coupes, and convertibles. They're also definitely on a downward trend. But BMW has a reasonable number to choose from. If we're talking about two-row convertibles, they have 3 of them. They have the 2 Series, the 4 Series, and the 8 Series, the artist formerly known as the 6 Series. And if you want a roadster, they've also got one of those. Nestled under this hood is a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine. It produces 255 horsepower and 294 pound-feet of torque, at least according to the spec sheet, because we all know that BMW underrates their engines. And that's how this vehicle, with theoretically just 255 horsepower and a curb weight of around 4,000 pounds, can go 0 to 60 in 5.8 seconds. Clearly, there's a little bit more oomph going on out of this engine than on the spec sheet. Now, if you want even more oomph, there is the M440i that gives you a 3-liter turbocharged engine, and that will bump things up to 382 horsepower. But there is a bit of a downside. Not only is the 3-liter engine going to be heavier than this, it's going to carry more of its weight on the front axle because it's going to stick out a little bit further this way. And in the M430i, most of the engine, if not the entire engine, is actually behind the front axle, giving this about a 49-51 weight balance, with most of the weight being on the back axle. In the M440i, it's closer to 50-50, with a little bit more weight up front, and if you get the M440i with all-wheel drive, then there's going to be even more weight on the front axle because of the addition of a front drive shaft and, of course, the front differential. And if you're considering the M440i, I would definitely recommend xDrive because there's a whole lot of power going on, and this vehicle really will need the added traction in order to give you the best performance. The 2-liter 4-cylinder is available with all-wheel drive, but unless you need it, I would recommend going rear-wheel drive. Cargo capacity is pretty generous for a convertible, ranging between 10.6 and 13.6 cubic feet, depending on whether you have the top up or down and want to fold that little partition in place. As with many power tops, there is a plastic partition here that you have to fold down and have it locked into place, so that way the electronics know that nothing is going to get crushed when the top starts moving. In addition, this vehicle has a folding rear seat back, which is a handy touch, but the lever for that is kind of hidden over here on the left side of the trunk. I don't mind admitting that it took me quite a while to actually find that little lever hiding right there on the left side of the cargo area. Once you pull the lever, you can then walk around here, grab that rear seat back, and fold it down in a 100% fashion. Doing so reveals this little storage area where you can keep the zipped up wind deflector. That's the wind deflector that would go right back there behind the seats. And then if I pull that out of the way, we have access to the entire trunk. I have to say this was a really ingenious bit of engineering to stuff this bag right back there in that area. If you leave the deflector at home, then it's going to be a lot easier to use the ski pass-through, which we have right there between the two rear seats. This is a 4-seat vehicle, not a 5-seat vehicle. Although let's be honest, most people are going to have 2 people in the vehicle maximum most of the time. So let's find out how easy this wind deflector is to install and remove. Pops out of this little fabric thing, and this actually is somewhat rigid because it has a little divider meant to snap right back in there and then protect that if you are putting things in the trunk. So that's actually a really nice touch the way they've done that. And if you want to put it somewhere, you can of course stuff it right back there behind the seats, even when you have this here. This appears to be a pretty typical design. You simply reach over there, align those little pins, little holes provided right there, and then it flops up. When it comes to the Alex and Auto's exclusive Trunk Comfort Index, I'm going to give this area 2 out of 10 points if the top is down as it is now. And if you put the top up, I actually could fit back here. And just in case you didn't believe me, here I am fitting in the trunk. If you've ever wondered what the lid of a convertible looks like from inside the trunk, now you know. You can see that there's some little baffles right there, and this is the little protector that actually folds down part of that little cargo divider, and you can see some of the components of the lid right there. Now the top does not technically go into the trunk, it actually goes into this storage area that is sort of on top of and in front of the trunk right there behind the rear seats. You can see it pops out of that area. There's that divider right there, the rear seats. Then the lid closes and the roof snaps back into place. Front seat comfort is excellent. This model has a multi-way adjustable power driver's seat, 4-way adjustable lumbar support, inflatable bolsters, extending thigh cushion, that one's manual, and a manual tilt telescopic steering column as well. There's a 2-position seat memory over there on the door. The front passenger seat doesn't have the memory, but the rest of the seat moves in exactly the same way as the driver's seat. Jumping into the back is pretty easy. The front seats power slide forward when you tilt them, right like that one there. And then of course they move right back into place once you put them back. The driver's seat in that position for me driving at 6 feet tall gives me about 1.5 inches of legroom left. This is not quite as roomy as a BMW 3 Series because the 4 Series has a decent amount of changes to the structure of the vehicle in order to turn it into the coupe and convertible. The 4 Series Grand Coupe of course is a little bit closer. You'll really notice that if I move over to this side, because eventually this seat will start crushing me. And it keeps going. Oh, it does give up a little bit. After it sensed some pressure, it then starts to move forward. Now let's give rear seat headroom a check. Obviously, I am going to have to put the roof up for that, so let's see how this goes.
Hasn't crushed me yet.
Headroom is definitely limited back here, but because of the way this roof is designed with these rigid panels, it actually feels a little bit more comfortable than some more classic ragtop designs because there are no bars hitting me anywhere in the head. We simply have these soft touch roof panels. While I'm back here, let's take a look around. We have some small storage cubbies right there, just underneath the rear speakers, 2 large cup holders for the rear passengers, 3-zone automatic climate control, some USB charge-only ports, and a really interesting location for those top tether anchors. If you were to have a child seat in here, you'd have to route that child seat anchor up here, through here, around the headrest, and then down there to those child seat anchors. Here is another look at the convertible top. I don't have it fully latched into place, so let's go ahead and latch it in there so you can see what it looks like. That tightens up all those seams around the front doors and front windows. If you zoom in, you can see that is a really nicely done area right there. And looking right up here at the panels, you can see that they actually have a squishy fabric section to them, and this is a 3-panel roof. The leather interior in here is sort of a red brick color. We have 4-way adjustable headrests, and we do have neck warmers. That's that little grate right there. You can see the upholstery has some contrasting white stitching, adjustable bolsters for the driver and the front passenger, a lot of soft touch materials, and a design theme that definitely is very much like the rest of the BMW lineup in North America. There's plenty of ambient lighting going on here. At the moment it is set to purple, some more of that leather right over there on the doors, a lot of soft touch materials, soft touch upper section of the dashboard, metal trim right there in the middle, soft touch and hard plastics lower on the dashboard. This section right here has sort of a rubbery feel, and then we find more usual hard plastics right there around that glove compartment. I was able to fit a larger 10-inch tablet computer inside. Speaking of tablet computers, we have the typical pop-up LCD infotainment system right here in the middle of the dashboard, styled an awful lot like a tablet computer glued to the dash. This is running BMW's latest iDrive software package. It supports wireless CarPlay, and you should know that it does not support wired CarPlay, only wireless. That is one trade-off there. We have the controls for the front 2 climate control zones. You can control the 3rd zone from the back or from the infotainment system. We have some direct access buttons down here and some favorite buttons. Those are programmable inside the iDrive system. We then have a Qi wireless charging mat. That compartment is close-offable via that little door. You can put your smartphone right about back there. Some of those larger smartphones may be a little bit tight, but that iPhone 12 Max does fit. We have a USB charge port. You can use that for your iPhone or whatever. 2 large cup holders there. 12-volt power port, matching metal trim to what we saw on the dashboard. BMW's typical shifter right there, a bunch of controls here for the 360-degree camera, parking systems, auto start, stop, disable, engine start, stop button, drive mode buttons, sport, comfort, eco, pro, and adaptive, and then there's some individual modes buried within those as well. You would use the infotainment system up there to select, or you can just double tap the button and get the individual mode, electric parking brake, auto brake hold, the neck warmers for the driver and front passenger. Interestingly, somewhat separate from the seat heating, which is up here in this button bank, and then we have the typical controller for BMW iDrive, but iDrive is a touchscreen, so you can just touch the screen if you'd rather do that, and that's definitely my preference. We then have a pretty large center console storage area under that, even though this does have rear-wheel drive. This is about 4.5 inches deep. As you'd expect in a modern BMW, we have a full-color heads-up display, and it does allow us access to scroll through a playlist even when you're using Apple CarPlay. Behind the steering wheel, we find BMW's full LCD instrument cluster, but as we typically see in BMWs, this is not as configurable as the LCD clusters that we find in Mercedes and Audi models. You should also know that if the top's down, you do definitely get a little bit of glare on that LCD. The steering wheel is a round 3-spoke design with pretty aggressive sport grips up top. This is the M Sport steering wheel. We have the controls for the cruise control system over here, but you'll notice no adaptive cruise control. Leather airbag cover, which is a really nice touch. I like that a lot more than the plastic airbags that we find in a decent number of luxury vehicles. Infotainment controls over here on the right side. If you use this scroll wheel and you have the heads-up display, that's how you would browse your playlist there. We have big paddle shifters on the back with little rubber grips behind. The model that I'm driving today weighs 3,918 pounds. That is a pretty significant bump over the 4 Series Coupe, of course because of the need to be able to support the vehicle with the top off, and of course that fabric top, which is going to be a little bit heavier than a cheap fabric top. I think it's worth the trade, however. I would certainly get this over the 4 Series Coupe because convertibles are just more fun. And this is a very practical, very easy to live with convertible because of that really thick, triple, quadruple layer top, whatever it is that you want to call it. 0 to 60 in this model ticked off in 5.8 seconds. That is definitely slower than the Coupe. That would do it in 5.5. But again, I think that trade-off is worth it. Now, if you get the BMW 430i, then the curb weight goes over 4,000 pounds. It is definitely a heavy convertible. If you want something a little bit lighter, there's going to be the 2 Series, but the 2 Series is realistically based on the 4 Series. It's a very closely related vehicle, and that is one of the reasons that the 2 Series is not crazy light, crazy nimble, or crazy small. It's sort of a 9/10 scale 4 Series. In my 60 to 0 braking test, it took just 108 feet for this to stop from 60 back to 0. That is an incredibly short stopping distance. Again, bear in mind, this is considerably heavier than a BMW 3 Series, and that's a really good stopping distance for a BMW 3 Series. You can definitely thank the big brakes and the grippy tires. Again, Pilot Sport 4S tires on this particular vehicle, 225s up front, 255s in the back. You can also thank the weight distribution in this vehicle because there's not a lot of weight up front for a luxury car like this. 49%, 51% in the rear. So this does have a slight rear weight bias. You put the top down, there's actually even a little bit more weight in the rear. And that's one of the reasons this handles like it's on rails. The 430i is fantastic with this particular package on it. Now, clearly BMW sent us the model with the summer tires, the grippy tires, the handling package, etc., because this is the most fun version of the 430, but I'm actually fine with that. And there's a reason that I did not ask for the M440i. I think this is the model that I would get. I like the lightness, I like the nimbleness, I like the fact that max power is very approachable. I can floor it, I can have fun with my right foot. This has a very lively chassis design to it. It doesn't get upset over broken pavement in the corners. It's the kind of vehicle that you can flog. You can drive to 9/10 a lot more comfortably than an M440i. The limits are going to be a little bit lower, but in terms of absolute grip, with the right tires on it, pretty similar to the M440i. Just the amount of performance in terms of thrust is going to be different. And I generally like vehicles like this that are well balanced in terms of power, handling ability, and braking ability, where the power is very accessible. Now, if you drive this back-to-back with the M440i, you will definitely notice that the shifts are a little bit slower on the automatic transmission, and the engine has a little bit more turbo lag inherent to the design. I don't find that a problem, and I think most people are going to get used to it, especially since this is less expensive than the M440i. Obviously, we're going to talk about that in a little bit, but I absolutely have to give this an A when it comes to handling. This is just a joy to drive. Sure, there's not as much steering feedback as you'd find in a BMW from the 1990s that had its top hacked off, but the chassis is an awful lot more rigid than those older BMW convertibles, making this, I think, on balance, more fun. The handling and the steering may not be as engaging or as raw, but this will do things that those BMWs just couldn't do. Out on a rougher road, like the gravel road that I'm on here, the 430i has a well-polished ride. I like the way the suspension is tuned. This has an adaptive suspension system, and even in its sportiest setting, it's still pretty livable out on a rougher road. Put the suspension in comfort mode, and this is definitely a good long-distance weekend vehicle. One of those things that BMWs back then could not do is be quiet with the lid up. I measured 71.5 decibels at 50 miles an hour with the lid up. That is definitely quiet for a ragtop convertible. Again, I love the convertible design in this vehicle. This is definitely quieter than your average entry-level or mainstream convertible out there, and very competitive with a lot of luxury hardtops as well. Another reason to buy the 4-cylinder engine over the 6-cylinder engine is fuel economy. I've been driving this 430i pretty hard over a week, and I do live up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass. I've still been averaging 27 miles per gallon. And if I treat this nicely and I drive it on my usual fuel economy test loop, I average 33 mpg, which is a really good score for a vehicle that's this size and, importantly, this heavy with summer tires on it. So fuel economy is definitely a solid reason to buy this. But more importantly, again, I just love the fun factor. With less weight on the front axle, this feels more willing to turn in, it feels more nimble, it's lighter. It doesn't seem like 200 pounds would make an enormous difference, but honestly, you can feel the difference. This again is not going to be as quick 0 to 60 as the M440i, but in some ways I think it's more fun, and I would certainly get the rear-wheel drive version of this unless you absolutely need all-wheel drive, because it retains the purity and the purity of fun that you can get only in a rear-wheel drive vehicle like this, especially when the top is down. During the week that I was driving the 430i, someone told me that they thought it was sort of the Ford Mustang of luxury car convertibles. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, and I think they actually might be right. Because the 430i is fun to drive, it's relatively affordable as far as luxury convertibles go, and it is a surprisingly practical vehicle as well. The rear seats are actually usable, and the trunk is pretty reasonable as well. Reasonable pricing is, of course, a subjective term. The coupe is going to start at $45,800. The 430i convertible is about $7,500 more, and you have to give up a half-second 0 to 60. Now, I actually think that's a pretty decent trade-off. If you want more power, that would be the M440i. That's going to set you back at least $66,200, but still going to have a very comfortable ride. It's going to have a very practical cargo area, a really quiet soft top, and a cargo pass-through, which is definitely very handy. When it comes to luxury competition, there really isn't much. We basically have the German alternatives. The Mercedes-Benz C-Class, either in C300, C43, or C63 configurations, and the price range is relatively similar to the BMW, with the exception that on the Mercedes side, if you get carried away with options, you can get things notably more expensive than the BMW. So base model value is pretty similar, but as you start adding options, the BMW is going to be a little bit less expensive. I have to say, I kind of prefer the way the BMW looks over the Mercedes-Benz C-Class. The C-Class is a little bit anonymous. If that's what you're after, then definitely take a look at that model. But if you want something that's a little bit more visually exciting, I don't particularly mind the buck-toothed look in the BMW 4 Series. Again, let me know what you think about that down there. But if you're looking for something that's a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more demure, take a look at the Mercedes-Benz. Now, I wouldn't exactly call the AMG variants of the C-Class restrained or relaxed. Performance is definitely where we find the M product line in BMW land, but the design is definitely going to be less adventurous, shall we say, than the BMW front-end design. Next up, we have the Audi A5 and S5. At the moment in the United States, there is no RS5. As we often see, the Audi is going to be the less expensive alternative in this trio, starting at $50,700, the S5 at $62,000. The thing to know about the Audi is that it's definitely not going to have that same nimble feel that we find in the BMW because of the way the vehicle is designed. All-wheel drive is standard. You cannot get a front-wheel drive or a rear-wheel drive S5 in the US at this time. The platform generally starts out as a front-wheel drive vehicle, even though it doesn't have a traditional front-wheel drive drivetrain design. The engine layout and the transmission design are actually basically the same as the BMW. It's just that Audi pushes the engine and transmission much further forward in the vehicle, and for some reason has chosen to drive the front wheels if you choose a two-wheel drive model. But in the United States, Audi has slowly been pushing those two-wheel drive models off the table, giving us all-wheel drive standard in a wide variety of their product range. This helps compensate for the weight balance that we find in a lot of Audi models. The engine is further in front, so we have more weight up front, even though it is not a front power bias. Once you get all-wheel drive in a modern Audi, except the transverse-engined Audis, mind you, then the majority of the power goes to the rear, but the majority of the weight is still up front. That results in a very predictable driving dynamic that a lot of people feel very comfortable with, but it does mean that it's not going to be quite as willing to change direction. And that's one of the things that I really love about the 430i, is how light the front end feels, how willing it is to change direction. It's not the swiftest entry in this segment, but it's definitely a lot of fun, especially if you get the sportier tire and brake options that are available on the 430i. If I were shopping in the segment, that's probably what I would get, because we don't have a Jaguar option. We don't have a Genesis option. We don't really have a Lexus option. There's the LC convertible, but it's a lot more expensive. There are a ton of different topless Porsche models, etc., but nothing else that is really in this segment, costing about $50,000 to $60,000, having a soft top or even a hard top available, and 2+2 seating with actual usable second row seats. It's basically the Mercedes, the Audi, and the BMW. And if I were shopping in this segment, since I'm a little bit cheap, I would probably get the 430i. It's a good value, and I also love the way that it drives. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below. I would also say that if you're looking for a vehicle with a convertible top, then personally, I would not buy the higher horsepower engine options because there is going to be a lot more body flex, there's going to be a little bit more squeaking, etc. Bear in mind that there are definitely going to be some dynamic differences between the coupe and the convertible variants of all of these options in the segment. The convertibles are going to be heavier, they're not going to be quite as rigid, obviously the top is missing, and so if you were looking for the most dynamic vehicle with two doors, then I would get the coupe version. If you're looking for a convertible, in my head, at any rate, I would prefer something that's a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more luxurious, and at that point, I guess I would be willing to give up a little bit of speed. Since you're already paying extra for the vehicle, basically for the price of an M440i Coupe, you're going to get an M430i Convertible with a few options for about the same price, and that's probably the direction that I would go. Let me know what you think about that. Find me over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, Instagram, Twitter, all those other social places, and I'll see everybody later.